Welcome, dear friend, to Luminous Uplift, a place where the wonders of our world are woven into gentle stories, crafted especially to carry you softly into rest. We are so glad you found your way here tonight. Whatever filled your hours today, the noise, the rushing, the endless demands upon your attention, you can set all of that down now quietly, like a bag you no longer need to carry. This moment belongs only to you. Take one slow, easy breath and feel the day begin to release its hold. Here at Luminous Uplift, we believe that the natural world holds a quiet kind of magic, a deep and luminous beauty, capable of soothing even the most restless of minds. Each journey we offer is an invitation to wander peacefully through the extraordinary, to let science and serenity move together like light filtering through leaves. And tonight we are drifting somewhere truly breathtaking. Imagine the air growing soft and warm, rich with the fragrance of earth and rain. Imagine the sound of water tracing its way along ancient roots, and bird song floating gently through a canopy so vast and green it seems almost to breathe. We are entering the rainforest, the living heart of our planet, where millions of delicate lives are quietly intertwined in an endless, unhurried dance. If these peaceful explorations bring you comfort, we warmly invite you to like this video and subscribe, so we may continue meeting you here night after night in this gentle space. Now let us begin our journey. Imagine for a moment that you are weightless. Imagine that the ordinary world, with all its sharp edges and urgent noises, has grown very far away, and that you are drifting slowly and without effort downward through a warm and golden sky. Below you, stretching out in every direction as far as your dreaming eyes can see, there is a canopy of green so vast and so alive that it seems less like a forest and more like a second sky, a sky made not of air and cloud but of leaf and branch, and the slow breathing of 10,000 living things. This is the place you are going. This is the place that has been waiting for you. Let yourself fall toward it gently, like a seed carried on a current of wind, and know that the forest below will catch you as softly as a hand outstretched in welcome. The light is changing as you descend. Up here, above the trees, the last of the afternoon sun still blazes in its full copper warmth, pouring itself generously across the upper surface of the canopy, as though trying to give one final, lingering gift before it slips beneath the horizon. The tops of the tallest trees catch this light and hold it, their crowns glowing almost gold, almost amber, like the tips of candles lit in some enormous and ancient ceremony. These are the emergent trees, the ones that have climbed highest of all, pushing their heads up above the general mass of the canopy to drink the sun directly, unfiltered and unshared. Some of them are so tall that their highest branches reach 40 meters or more above the forest floor, and standing beneath them, if you were standing, you might feel very much as though you had walked into a cathedral, one built not by human hands over decades, but by the slow and patient labor of the earth itself over millions of years. There is something you should know about this place, something that scientists have spent lifetimes measuring and cataloging and still find themselves quietly astonished by. Tropical rainforests like this one cover only about 6% of the surface of our planet. 6%. You could draw that on a globe, and it would seem like almost nothing. A few green patches scattered across the middle of the map, hugging the equatorial belt, where the sun shines longest and the rains come most reliably. And yet within those small green patches lives more than half of all the plant and animal species on Earth, more than half of all the living variety our world has ever produced, packed into 6% of its surface, layered and nested and intertwined in relationships of such extraordinary complexity that scientists are still discovering new species every year, sometimes every week. Species that have been quietly going about their lives in this green cathedral for millennia, unknown to anyone outside these borders of bark and vine and shadow. Think about that for a moment as you drift closer, as the individual shapes of leaves begin to resolve from what was, at a distance, simply a texture, a rumpled green blanket thrown across the hills. Each of those leaves is a factory, a solar panel, a tiny breathing organism in its own right, pulling carbon dioxide from the air and water from the roots far below, and using the energy of that setting sun to weave them into sugar, into life, into the very substance of the forest. The Amazon rainforest alone, this one vast living system that spills across 9 countries and shelters more species than any other place on Earth, produces something close to 20% of the world's oxygen through this process of photosynthesis. Every 5th breath you take, wherever you are in the world, has a little of the Amazon in it. Every 5th breath carries something of this green and breathing dark. You are already in a way part of this forest, and it is already part of you. You are close enough now to see the layers. This is one of the things that makes a rainforest different from other forests, the way it organizes itself into distinct stories, like the floors of a great and ancient library. The canopy itself, the main canopy where the greatest density of leaves and branches creates that unbroken ceiling of green, typically hangs somewhere between 30 and 45 meters above the ground. 30 to 45 meters. If you have ever stood at the top of a 10-story building and looked down, you have some sense of that distance, though a building cannot prepare you for the experience of standing at the bottom of it and looking up through layers of living light. Below the canopy, there is the understory, where smaller trees and young ones waiting their turn reach upward in the dimmer light, their leaves grown broad and flat to catch whatever photons filter down through the canopy above, and below that, the shrub layer, and below that, the forest floor itself, which is so deeply shadowed that only the most specialized plants have learned to survive its permanent green twilight. You are entering the canopy layer now, and the transition is something you feel before you fully see it. The air changes. This is one of those quiet scientific facts that sounds simple until you experience it, and then it becomes something almost magical. The air inside a mature tropical rainforest can be 2 to 8 degrees Celsius cooler than the air over cleared land nearby. 2 to 8 degrees. The trees create this themselves, through transpiration, through the simple biological process of releasing water vapor through their leaves, cooling the air around them the way a wet cloth cools a feverish forehead. The canopy acts as a roof, shading the interior from the direct heat of the sun. The density of life itself, all that breathing, all that water cycling through root and trunk and leaf and sky, creates its own microclimate, a pocket of cool, humid, green-scented air that feels ancient and sheltering and deeply, profoundly alive. You feel it as a softening. The heat of the open sky gives way to something gentler, something that asks less of you. The light, which was gold and direct above the canopy, becomes something else entirely as it filters down through the first layer of leaves, and the second, and the third. It becomes green. It becomes dappled and shifting and uncertain, moving with the slight stir of the evening breeze in the upper branches, so that the whole interior of the forest seems to breathe and shimmer with a slow, living pulse. Light falls in long, slanted columns, where gaps in the canopy allow the sun a narrow path downward, and these columns are filled with motes of dust and spores and the microscopic stuff of life, drifting through the green dark like tiny stars in a very slow galaxy. The sounds reach you before the details of the forest do. Sound travels differently in here, caught and softened by all that leaf and bark, absorbed into the moisture-heavy air, so that what you hear is not the sharp and separate sounds of the open world, but something more blended, more continuous, a weaving together of voices and movements that creates the living texture of the forest's afternoon. There are birds still calling in the upper canopy, the last of the daytime species making their final announcements before the light fails entirely. There are insects, always insects, the constant background hum and chirp and tick of the forest's smallest residents, who outnumber everything else put together by such extraordinary margins that trying to count them is a little like trying to count the individual drops in a rainstorm. There are the sounds of leaves adjusting themselves in the gentle current of air, and the occasional drip of water collected from the afternoon's humidity, falling from one leaf to another, each drop following a slow and wandering path downward through the stories of the forest, touching and releasing and touching again. And then there is the quality of the silence beneath all of it. In a tropical rainforest, you are never exactly in silence, not the way you might be in a desert or at the bottom of a deep and snowbound valley. But there is, beneath all the sound, a quality of stillness that is very particular, very specific to this place. It is the stillness of something very old and very patient and very deeply at home in itself. The forest has been here, in one form or another, for so long that the concept of time works differently within it. Individual trees may live for 500 years or more, and the forest community around them may have been continuous for many millions of years, changing and adapting and surviving through climate shifts and ice ages, and the long, slow drift of the continents, never quite disappearing, never quite losing its essential nature. You can feel this age in the air. You can feel it the way you sometimes feel, standing in a very old building, the accumulated weight of all the living that has been done there. The light is still changing. It is dusk now, truly dusk, and something is happening in the forest that scientists have given a beautiful and precise name, the twilight shift. As the light falls below a certain threshold, as the photons that have been powering the daytime world begin to thin and fade, the forest undergoes a transformation that is neither sudden nor complete, but gradual and layered, like the change from one movement to the next in a very long piece of music. The species that have been active through the day, the parrots and toucans, and the brilliant, quick butterflies that fed in the canopy's sunlit upper stories, begin to settle in quiet. They find their roosting places, tuck their heads, fold themselves into stillness, and as they do, others begin to stir. The night shift, as it were, is beginning to clock in, and the forest prepares to become something subtly but significantly different, something that shares the same physical space as the daytime forest, but inhabits a different layer of time, a different register of life. You can see it happening around you as you settle into the canopy. If settle is the right word for what you're doing, which is more like being gently held in place by the accumulated softness of everything around you. A tree frog, its skin a brilliant translucent green in the last of the light, emerges from its daytime hiding place in the cup of a bromeliad, a plant that has made its home not in the soil but in the crook of a branch, 30 meters above the ground, collecting rainwater in its central rosette and hosting within that tiny pool an entire miniature ecosystem of insects and microorganisms that have never in their lives touched the forest floor. The frog blinks its enormous golden eyes, those eyes that are made for gathering every last photon from a dim and leaf-filtered world, and it is still for a moment in that particular way that frogs are still completely motionless, as though it has become part of the branch itself, as though the boundary between frog and forest is a negotiable thing. Somewhere above you, invisible in the thickening green dusk, something large shifts its weight on a high branch, and a soft rain of displaced water droplets comes down through the layers, catching what is left of the light as they fall, briefly becoming tiny falling diamonds, then vanishing into the dark below. The canopy absorbs the movement, absorbs the sound, absorbs the evidence of whatever creature has decided to begin its night in that particular spot, and returns to its slow and breathing stillness. The temperature, already several degrees gentler than the world above, seems to soften further as the light fails, as though the forest draws a little closer around you in the cooling dark, as though it means to keep you warm. There is a flower opening somewhere very near you. You cannot see it, not yet, but you can detect the first faint thread of its scent beginning to uncurl into the air. Something sweet and slightly strange, designed not for you, but for the moth that will come looking for it in a little while. The moth whose wingspan precisely matches the depth of the flower's throat, the moth and the flower having arrived at this exact arrangement over such an enormously long span of time, that the relationship between them is now written into their bodies, into the very architecture of wing and petal. This is one of the forest's deepest truths, that almost nothing here is accidental, that almost everything you can see or smell or hear or touch has been shaped by relationship, by the long, slow conversation between species that has been going on in this green and ancient place since before there were words for any of it. The last birds are finding their branches. The last butterflies have closed their wings. The canopy around you is settling into the particular quality of stillness that belongs to the space between day and night, that liminal moment when neither belongs entirely, and the forest seems briefly suspended between its two selves, daytime and dark, and the whole vast layered living system of it seems to pause and breathe and prepare for the turning of the wheel. And as the last amber light filters down through layer upon layer of leaves, each one catching the fading glow like a tiny stained glass window, you begin to notice how the forest itself seems to exhale, releasing a long, slow breath of cool, green-scented air that carries with it the faint sound of something beginning, something waking, something that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise of the day for its moment to rise. It starts so gently you might almost mistake it for your own imagination. A single note, clear and glass bright, ringing out from somewhere deep within the undergrowth. Then another, then a third, slightly lower, slightly softer, as if answering the first from across a great distance. And before you have had time to fully understand what is happening, the air around you has begun to fill, slowly and inevitably the way water fills a basin, not all at once but in 1,000 tiny tributaries joining and joining again until the whole vessel is trembling with sound. This is the rainforest at nightfall, and there is nowhere else on Earth quite like it. Scientists who study sound in natural environments work within a field called soundscape ecology, a discipline that treats the acoustic environment of a place the way a doctor might treat a patient, listening carefully, reading the patterns, diagnosing the health of an entire ecosystem through the language of its noise. And what they have found, time and again, when they turn their sensitive instruments toward the living walls of the tropical rainforest, is something that surpasses almost every other environment on the planet in sheer acoustic complexity. The rainforest does not simply make sounds. It composes them, it layers them, it orchestrates them with a precision that would humble any concert hall. Imagine for a moment that you could hear every signal at once, every wing beat and leaf tremble, every insect vibration and bird call echo, every drip of moisture falling from a broad canopy leaf to the dark soil below. Researchers have documented that a healthy rainforest soundscape contains thousands of overlapping signals at any given moment, each one a tiny beacon, a communication, a love song, or a territorial declaration or a warning broadcast into the green cathedral air. And those thousands of signals taken together are not chaos. They are information. When scientists analyze the acoustic richness of a rainforest, they can measure directly how diverse and how intact its community of living things truly is. A diminished soundscape means a diminished forest. A rich one means life is holding on. But right now, at this particular threshold moment, at this soft, bruised hour, when day and night are still negotiating who will take possession of the sky, the soundscape is doing something remarkable. It is changing. Not randomly, not haphazardly, but with a kind of biological precision that would astonish you if you let yourself really think about it. The day creatures are growing quieter. The bright, piercing calls of the canopy birds are softening, pulling back, retreating into the high branches where roosting bodies tuck wings close and eyes close and breathing slows. The hummingbirds whose wings earlier beat at frequencies too fast for the eye to follow have found their stillness. The monkeys have settled. The daytime insects are beginning to wind down their frequencies. And in the spaces they leave behind, new voices are already rising to claim the frequencies that have just been vacated. Because that is one of the extraordinary things that soundscape ecologists have discovered about places like this. The acoustic environment of a rainforest is not simply loud. It is organized. Different species have evolved over immeasurable spans of time to call in different frequency bands, to occupy different sonic niches, the way other creatures occupy physical ones. A species calling at a higher frequency will not interfere with a species calling at a lower one, and over the millennia, through the patient invisible work of natural selection, the rainforest has essentially written its own score, assigning each instrument its own register, its own timing, its own territory within the vast spectrum of possible sound. And the frogs know this. Oh, the frogs understand this better than almost anyone. As the light drops below the threshold that their skin and their ancient light-sensitive cells can detect, the frogs begin. Not all at once, but in a sequence that feels almost choreographed, almost ceremonial. Many species of rainforest frog begin calling precisely at dusk, triggered by that specific quality of fading light, that exact dimming of the world. Each species has its own frequency band staked out across thousands of generations of evolution, its own acoustic territory that slots neatly into the gaps between its neighbors, so that the whole chorus can rise together without anyone drowning anyone else out. It is in the truest sense a kind of music. Not music made by intention, not music made by thought, but music that has been shaped by time itself, by the slow pressure of survival and reproduction, and the need to be heard without interference. The first frog you hear is calling from somewhere low, from the dark space between the roots of a great tree where standing water has collected and gone still and mirror smooth. Its call is a soft, descending note, a small falling sound like a drop of water finding its level. Then another frog answers from further away, its call slightly higher, sitting just above the first in the acoustic landscape, the way a second voice might sit above a first in a round. Then another, each voice distinct, each voice placed with the careful precision of long evolutionary habit into its own frequency band, its own corner of the sound space, and yet all of them together beginning to weave something that is larger than any individual call could ever be. Meanwhile, above the frogs, in the middle registers of the air, something else is preparing. The cicadas have been singing all day, as you perhaps already noticed, their sound climbing at times to a volume that would be shocking if you measured it against ordinary human experience. Tropical cicadas are capable of producing sounds exceeding 100 decibels, which is a number that, placed in the context of a suburban street, would be alarming and painful. The volume of a passing motorcycle or a pneumatic drill held close to your ear. And yet, standing here in the forest, you do not experience it that way. The dense layering of leaves and branches and vines and broad-bladed understory plants acts as a natural acoustic diffuser, absorbing and scattering and softening the sound until what reaches you is not a single overwhelming wave of noise, but a soft, continuous hum, a vibration more felt than heard, a gentle pressure against the skin that is somehow deeply, inexplicably calming. There is science behind that feeling, as it happens. Researchers studying the effects of natural soundscapes on the human body have found something quietly remarkable, that the act of listening to environments like this one, to the layered and living acoustic texture of places like a rainforest at dusk, does measurable things to your physiology. Cortisol levels, the hormone most closely associated with stress and alertness and the sustained tension of modern life, begin to fall. And not slowly, not over hours, but within minutes of exposure. The parasympathetic nervous system, which governs the body's ability to rest and restore and repair itself, becomes more active. Your heart rate eases. Your breath deepens without your asking it to. Muscle tension you perhaps did not even know you were carrying begins to release its grip. Your body knows this sound. Your body has always known this sound. Long before there were cities or electric lights or the constant low-frequency hum of machinery and traffic. Long before there were schedules or alarms or the urgent pinging of devices demanding your attention, there were forests, and there were creatures calling in them at dusk, and there were human ears attuned to the meaning of that sound, which was safety, shelter, the world settling into its nocturnal order, nothing to fear, let yourself be still. And so you settle. You do not decide to settle. You simply find, after a few minutes of listening, that your shoulders have descended from somewhere near your ears to somewhere more reasonable, that your jaw has unclenched itself, that the slight furrow between your brows has smoothed away without your noticing when it left. The sound has done this. The sound is doing this still, continuing to do it with every breath you take and every note that rises from the darkening undergrowth around you. The air is different now. You can feel it on your skin. Cooler than it was even 10 minutes ago, carrying the green deep smell of wet earth and moss and something floral, faint and sweet, from some night-blooming plant you cannot see but know is there somewhere in the dark beyond the ferns. The light has almost entirely departed from the lowest layers of the forest now, though far above. The very tops of the tallest trees are still catching the last slanted gold of the sun's retreat, a warm rim of color around the crown of the canopy that looks from below like the edge of another world. Down here in the growing dark, the soundscape continues to build itself layer by careful layer. The frogs add their voices one by one like instruments joining an ancient orchestra that has been playing since long before any human ear was there to hear it. An orchestra whose conductor is nothing more than the slow turning of the earth away from the sun. And somewhere beneath that woven curtain of sound, the forest floor itself begins to the frogs, add their voices one by one like instruments, joining an ancient orchestra that has been playing since long before any human ear was there to hear it. An orchestra whose conductor is nothing more than the slow turning of the earth away from the sun, and somewhere beneath that woven curtain of sound, the forest floor itself begins to breathe in a different register entirely. Something lower and slower, and more patient than anything that moves or sings or calls out in the dark. Something that has been going about its work in the same unhurried way for millions of years, long before the first frog found its voice, long before the first tree reached upward toward a sun it could barely feel. Down here, beneath everything, the world changes. It softens. The air thickens with the scent of old wood and wet earth, and something sweetly mineral, like the smell of a stone turned over after a long rain. The light, if you could call it that, falls in pieces. Less than 2% of all the sunlight that pours itself generously onto the canopy far above ever reaches the forest floor, and so what arrives down here is not so much light as the memory of light, a dim and amber filtering, a quiet illumination that asks nothing of the eyes, that lets them rest and simply receive. It is a perpetual gentle twilight, a world that exists in the same soft grayness, whether the sun is at its highest or beginning to slope toward the horizon. Noon and dusk are the same down here. Morning arrives not as brightness, but as a very slight warming, a barely perceptible shift in the quality of shadow. This is a place that has learned to live without the full generosity of the sun, and it has found, in that learning, a kind of extraordinary abundance. The floor itself is layered like the pages of a very old book. At the top, the freshest leaves, some still holding the shapes and colors they wore in the canopy, curled and golden and spotted with the first blush of decay. Beneath those leaves already softening, their edges dissolving, their veins beginning to separate from the flesh that once carried water and sugar and life up toward the sky. And beneath those, a dark and crumbling matter that is no longer quite leaf, and not yet quite soil, something in the beautiful middle passage of transformation. In a temperate forest, in the woods of a cooler and quieter latitude, a fallen leaf might lie on the ground for 2 or 3 years, slowly releasing itself back into the earth. Here in the warm and humid cathedral of the rainforest, that same leaf would be gone in 6 weeks. 6 weeks, and all that it was would be taken back, redistributed, woven into something new and living. The pace of transformation here is breathtaking, though it happens at a scale too small and too intimate for our eyes to follow. And yet, if you could shrink yourself down, if you could become very still and very quiet and very small, you would find that the forest floor is not quiet at all. It is teeming. It is a city of unimaginable density and complexity, a civilization older than anything human beings have ever built, operating according to laws that were established long before we arrived to wonder at them. Take a single teaspoon of soil from this dark and fragrant floor. Just one small teaspoon, the kind you might use to stir a cup of warm tea before you settle in for the night. In that tiny measure of earth, there are more living organisms than there are people on this entire planet. More lives than there are human lives. Bacteria and archaea so ancient, their ancestors remember a world without oxygen. Fungi sending their thread-like bodies in all directions. Nematodes, tiny and transparent, moving through the water films between soil particles like ghosts through walls. Mites, springtails, protozoa, organisms so small they have no names in any ordinary language. Organisms that exist beyond the reach of the unaided eye, but that are nonetheless doing extraordinary, essential work in the dark. This is one of the great paradoxes of the rainforest, one of those beautiful contradictions that the natural world offers us when we look closely and humbly enough. The soil here, in spite of everything, in spite of the towering trees and the impossible abundance of life stacked high above it, is paradoxically poor. Nutrient poor. If you were to take a handful of this dark earth and analyze it, you would find it surprisingly thin in the minerals and organic compounds that plants in other climates depend upon to grow. And the reason for this is also the reason for the forest's extraordinary richness, its miraculous productivity. Because here, nothing waits. Here, nothing sits idle and accumulates slowly in the earth. The moment a leaf falls, the moment a branch comes down, the moment any creature dies and settles into the dark, the community of decomposers is already at work. Bacteria begin their chemical unraveling. Fungi send their filaments through the fallen matter. Millipedes and beetles and tiny invisible animals shred and consume and pass nutrients through their body. And the nutrients that are released, the phosphorus, the nitrogen, the potassium, all the mineral wealth locked inside what was once living, are taken up almost immediately by the living roots waiting just beneath the surface. The soil barely has time to hold what it receives before the forest reaches down and takes it back. The earth is not a bank here, accumulating interest over long years. The earth is a marketplace, and the transactions happen in the blink of a geological eye. And so the great trees above do not grow from rich soil in the way we might imagine. They grow from something closer to a living relay, a continuous and extraordinarily rapid passing of substance from the dead to the living and back again. The forest feeds itself. It consumes itself and regenerates itself in the same motion, like a slow and verdant breathing, like something dreaming of itself without interruption. But the most extraordinary part of this underground world, the part that fills the mind with something like wonder and something like peace in equal measure, is what is happening not at the surface of the soil, but deeper within it, in the cool and lightless passages between the roots. Down there, in a darkness that has never once been touched by sunlight, a network is growing, has been growing for longer than we can easily imagine. The fungi, those strange and ancient organisms that are neither plant nor animal, something older and more patient than either, have stretched their thread-like bodies, their hyphae, through every available space in the soil, weaving between and around the roots of the great trees, forming connections so intimate and so functional that biologists have come to call them mycorrhizae, from the Greek words for fungus and root. Rest emerging so complete that it is sometimes difficult to say where one organism ends and the other begins. These networks span entire acres of forest. A single fungal organism, though organism is almost too simple a word for something so distributed, so boundaryless, can extend its living threads across distances that would take a person many minutes to walk. And through every one of those threads, something is moving. Sugars produced by the leaves of the trees above in their sunlit work of photosynthesis flow downward through the roots and out into the fungal network, feeding the fungi in the dark. And in return, the fungi draw from the soil minerals that the trees cannot reach on their own. Phosphorus especially, that essential element that the nutrient-poor soil makes so difficult to find, and pass it upward into the roots. It is an exchange so old and so reliable that most of the trees in this forest could not survive without it. The partnership predates the forest itself. Fungi and plants have been trading in this quiet underground economy for nearly 500 million years, since the first plants made their hesitant way onto land and found, in the fungi already living in the soil, a partner they could not do without. But there is something even more quietly astonishing about these networks, something that has only in the last few decades become clear to the scientists who study them, something that when you hear it in the dark, in the stillness before sleep, has the quality of a very old story being told for the first time. The network does not only connect a single tree to the fungi around its own roots, it connects trees to each other. The mycorrhizal threads run from the roots of one tree and join underground to the roots of another and another and another until the entire forest floor is threaded through with this invisible web of connection, this living internet of root and fungus and slow chemical exchange. And through this network, trees can share. A tree growing in a gap where light reaches the floor can send surplus sugars through the network to a neighboring tree struggling in deeper shade. A tree under attack from insects, its leaves being consumed, can send chemical signals through the fungal threads to its neighbors, who, receiving the signal, begin to produce defensive compounds of their own before the insects arrive. The trees are, in some sense, that we are only beginning to understand in conversation. Not in words, not in anything our minds are built to translate, but in a language of molecules and gradients and slow, continuous exchange. A language so old it predates flowers themselves, predates seeds, predates almost everything we think of when we imagine a forest. And the forest floor, this dark and quiet and seemingly empty place, is where that conversation lives. The words of it pass beneath our feet with every step we take. They pass through the soil we dig in our gardens and the earth we walk across without thinking. They are happening right now, in this very moment, in the dark beneath every forest on earth that has kept its trees and its soil intact, in every place where the ancient partnership between root and fungus has been allowed to continue undisturbed. It is easy to forget, in a world measured by what can be seen and heard and held, that the most essential communications, the most foundational relationships, the ones on which entire ecosystems depend, may be happening in silence and darkness, too slow and too small for us to witness directly. And there is something in that thought, if you let it settle quietly into the mind, the way a leaf settles onto the forest floor, something restful and reassuring, a reminder that the world is larger and more generously connected than anything we can see from where we stand. The night above the forest floor has deepened now. The canopy, invisible in the darkness, holds its sleeping birds and its roosting insects, its slow night-blooming flowers beginning to open their pale petals toward a moon they can just barely sense. The frogs continue their ancient orchestration, their voices layering and separating in patterns that follow rules no human hand wrote down. And beneath all of it, beneath the roots and the soil, and the 6-week journey of a fallen leaf back into the substance of the world, the network hums with its slow and nourishing traffic. The fungi send their pale filaments a little further through the dark. The roots receive what they are given. The earth is busy with its invisible abundance. This is the oldest part of the forest, and also the least celebrated, the part that never appears in the pictures taken by the visitors who come to look up at the canopy in wonder. But without it, everything above would fall. Without the rapid recycling, the forest would starve on its own richness. Without the fungal threads, the trees would stand alone in ways that would eventually weaken them past repair. The floor holds the forest up, not only in the physical sense of roots anchoring trunks to earth, but in the deeper sense that all the forest's abundance flows through this dark and patient place on its way from one living thing to the next. There is something beautiful in that, something worth holding in the mind as the eyes grow heavy and the breath slows and the body sinks a little further into the comfort of rest. The most important things are often the most hidden. The most essential connections are often the ones we walk over without noticing. And the oldest languages are spoken in the dark, in the cool and fragrant earth, in the silence between the roots, where even now, even in this very moment, a slow and ancient conversation continues, unhurried and unbroken, as the forest tends to itself in the night. The darkness down here does not feel empty once you understand what lives within it. It feels full, quietly, invisibly, enormously full. Full of transformation and exchange and connection and the patient work of countless lives too small to see but too important to be without. Full of the chemistry of renewal, the biology of reciprocity, the deep and mineral generosity of the earth, giving back what it has received and receiving back what it has given in an endless and unhurried cycle that asks nothing of us except, perhaps, that we slow down enough to sense that it is happening. And so the night deepens, and the forest breathes, and beneath the breathing the soil continues its invisible work, and the network carries its slow and essential messages from root to root in the perpetual twilight beneath the floor, a twilight that has nothing to do with the time of day, a darkness that is not absence but presence, not emptiness, but an almost incomprehensible fullness, and at the edges of that network, where the oldest trees send their deepest roots, new connections are always forming, new threads reaching toward new roots, the network extending itself as it has always extended itself, patient and persistent and alive in ways that do not require our recognition to be real. The leaf that fell 6 weeks ago is gone now, returned entirely to the living fabric of the forest, become part of a root or a fungal thread or a bacterium or something for which we have no name. It is not lost. Nothing here is lost. Everything that falls is caught. And now, in the deepest hour of the tropical night, the forest floor settles into its own particular rhythm, the rhythm of the decomposers working in the warm dark, the rhythm of water moving slowly down through layers of soil, the rhythm of roots absorbing and releasing, of fungi growing their fraction of a millimeter through the earth, and somewhere in that rhythm, beneath all the visible grandeur of the forest, in the place where everything essential actually happens, the network continues to come alive in ways that daylight never quite reveals. The fungi threading their pale filaments between the roots like slow silver rivers running through the dark, carrying sugars and minerals and quiet chemical messages from one tree to the next in a language so old it predates flowers themselves, and it is through these living threads that the great trees above come alive in ways that daylight never quite reveals. The fungi threading their pale filaments between the roots like slow silver rivers running through the dark, carrying sugars and minerals and quiet chemical messages from one tree to the next in a language so old it predates flowers themselves. And it is through these living threads that the great trees above begin to speak to one another in ways that have no sound, no gesture, no visible movement at all, only the slow and patient passage of living things through living things. A conversation conducted in the currency of carbon and phosphorus and water, whispered along threads thinner than a human hair, threading their way through the darkness like sentences being written in a language that the forest has been perfecting for hundreds of millions of years. Settle into this now, into the soft weight of the earth pressing down around those roots, into the warmth that lingers in the deep soil long after the surface has cooled, and let yourself imagine what it might feel like to be part of something that vast and that ancient, something that has no beginning you could point to, no single moment of invention, only a gradual and unhurried becoming that stretched across geological time until it arrived, quietly and without ceremony, at the extraordinary complexity it carries today. The system that scientists sometimes call the Wood Wide Web is not a metaphor exactly, though it borrows the imagery of connection and network and information flow that we associate with our own technologies. Technologies that are, when measured against what the forest has been doing, almost embarrassingly new. What moves through the fungal network is real and measurable and physical, actual molecules of carbon fixed by sunlight and woven into sugars by the green factories of leaves far above, actual phosphorus drawn up from the mineral darkness of deep soil by the fine fungal threads that reach where roots cannot. Actual nitrogen cycling through the web in forms that trees can absorb and build into their cells and use to grow new wood and new leaves and new seeds that will one day fall to the forest floor and begin, if they are fortunate, the long work of becoming trees themselves. The fungi that make this possible are mycorrhizal fungi, organisms that have lived in intimate partnership with plant roots since before the first trees existed, since the earliest land plants were still experimenting with the strange new environment above the water, learning to hold themselves upright against the pull of gravity, learning to pull moisture and minerals from the raw and largely lifeless rock that was, in those earliest chapters of terrestrial life, all the land had to offer. The word mycorrhizal comes from the Greek for fungus and root, and that is precisely what it describes, a union so thorough and so ancient that neither partner is entirely itself without the other, the fungus feeding on the sugars the plant produces in its leaves, the plant drawing on the extraordinary mineral-gathering ability of the fungal threads to find what it needs in soil that would otherwise be too sparse to sustain it. This is not predation. It is not even cooperation in the way we might usually mean that word. It is something closer to a merger, a blending of two kinds of life into something that is, in its fullest expression, more capable than either could be alone. And in the rainforest, where the soil beneath that extravagance of green life is often surprisingly thin and surprisingly poor in nutrients, this partnership is not a luxury. It is the foundation of everything. The great trees you're imagining now, those enormous pillars of wood rising 60, 80, 100 meters into the air, draped in their veils of mist and hung with the bright flags of bromeliads and orchids, those trees are standing partly on the invisible work of the fungal network beneath them, drawing sustenance from a web that spreads through the soil the way the roots of the forest spread through the sky, in every direction, reaching, connecting, gathering, sharing. And the sharing is real. This is one of the things that makes the research, when you sit with it quietly, feel almost unbearably tender. The nutrients that move through the fungal network do not move randomly, do not distribute themselves equally through the web, the way water might seep through sand. They move with a kind of directionality, flowing toward need, flowing toward kin, flowing in patterns that suggest something like intention, even if the word intention is one we must hold carefully here, aware that we are borrowing it from our own experience and placing it against something that may require a different kind of vocabulary, one we do not quite have yet. The largest and oldest trees in a rainforest, the ones that have stood long enough to let their root systems expand into vast underground architectures, to let their fungal connections multiply and ramify and deepen into something approaching a network hub. These trees are sometimes called mother trees, and the name, for all its sentimentality, reflects a genuine observation about how they function within the web. A mother tree may be 200 years old, 300, 500, and in a forest where some trees have been standing for more than 1,000 years, even 500 years represents a particular kind of seniority, a depth of root and connection and fungal relationship that the younger trees around her have simply not had time to accumulate. Her root system may extend for dozens of meters in every direction. Her fungal network may connect her to hundreds of other trees, of multiple species, in a web of reciprocal exchange that has been building and deepening for longer than most nations have existed. And within that web, something remarkable happens when her own seedlings are present. The ecologist Suzanne Simard, who has spent decades studying these networks in forests, demonstrated through careful and patient research that mother trees preferentially direct carbon and nutrients toward their own offspring through the fungal connections that bind them. The mechanism involves the recognition of chemical signals, a kind of molecular signature that the seedlings carry, announcing their kinship, and the mother tree's network responds to those signals by directing a greater flow of resources toward those particular small trees struggling in the deep shade of the forest floor, where the light is dim and the competition is fierce and survival in those early years is anything but guaranteed. It is, if you let yourself feel it fully, an act of extraordinary care, conducted not through touch or sound or any of the channels through which we express our own caring, but through the slow chemistry of fungal threads in dark soil, through the patient transfer of sugars and minerals from one generation of trees to the next. Imagine being a small seedling on the floor of that ancient forest, barely a hand's height above the soil, your first few leaves still pale with newness, the light filtering down through 100 meters of canopy far above you in thin scattered fragments that barely reach the ground. You could not survive on light alone, not in those first years. The canopy above you has been filtering sunlight for centuries, and what reaches the floor is a whisper of what the leaves above receive. But beneath you, invisible, running in all directions through the moist, dark earth, the fungal threads connect you to the vast network of your mother tree, and through those threads come carbon and phosphorus and the quiet chemistry of survival, a gift passing from one generation to the next through a medium so ancient it has had no need to change. There is something else that moves through the network, something that speaks to another kind of communication altogether, a kind of alarm system, a system of warning that the forest has been running for far longer than anything we might recognize as intelligence. When a tree comes under stress, when the insects arrive to feed on its leaves, or when drought begins to tighten its hold on the soil and the tree's water supply begins to falter, the tree does not simply suffer in silence. It begins to transmit. Through its root network and its fungal connections, it sends chemical signals outward, molecules that carry information about the nature of the stress, about the specific insect or pathogen causing harm, about the severity and urgency of the threat. These signals travel through the wood wide web to neighboring trees, who receive them and respond, in many documented cases producing their own defensive chemicals before the threat has even reached them, priming their own systems against an attack they have been warned about by their neighbors. And the signals do not travel only through the soil. The stressed tree also releases volatile compounds into the air, aromatic chemical messages that drift on the warm, humid air of the rainforest and are detected by the leaves of neighboring trees, who absorb those compounds and use them as information, adjusting their own chemistry in response, building up the compounds that make their leaves less palatable, less digestible, less welcoming to the insects that are coming. The forest is not passive in the face of threat. It is responsive, and its responsiveness is woven through both the dark soil and the warm air above it, a communication system operating in two registers simultaneously, underground and aerial, chemical and continuous, a kind of distributed intelligence that has no center, no brain, no single point of control, only the vast interconnected mutuality of the whole. Now let yourself rest in the knowledge of how deep that mutuality goes in time, in the slow accumulated time of a forest where trees have been standing for more than 1,000 years. A 1,000-year-old tree has been building its root network for 10 centuries. 10 centuries of seasonal growth, of new fungal threads extending outward through the soil, of new connections forming with new trees, of a network growing in complexity and reach the way a river system grows more intricate as more streams join it. A tree that has stood for 1,000 years in a rainforest carries within its root system and its fungal connections a record of the forest's history, a living archive of relationships and responses and adaptations accumulated across a time span that stretches back before Columbus sailed, before the great cathedrals of Europe were built, before most of the stories we think of as ancient were written down. The tree was there, quietly without hurry, putting down another ring of wood each year, extending its roots another few centimeters into the dark, adding another thread to the vast web it was slowly becoming the center of. And then one day, perhaps after 1,000 years, or perhaps after much longer, the great tree begins to die. It may be disease, or the slow exhaustion of a system that has simply run its full and extraordinary course. Its leaves begin to thin. Its canopy opens. Light falls where light has not fallen for centuries. And as it dies, something happens in the network beneath it that the research of Suzanne Simard and others has illuminated with a kind of scientific precision that does not somehow diminish its wonder but only deepens it. The dying mother tree floods the network around it with nutrients, a great pulse of carbon and minerals and chemical information flowing outward through its fungal connections to the trees nearby, and most particularly to the young trees of the next generation that are waiting in its shadow, the seedlings and saplings that have been sustained by its network through their own slow early years. It is as though the great tree, sensing its own ending, opens its hands and lets everything it has been holding flow outward, a final gift to the forest it is leaving. A transfer of resources across the threshold between one life and the next, conducted in the language of the wood wide web, in the old slow grammar of fungal threads in dark soil. Let that settle for a moment. Let it drift through you like the slow warmth of something deeply true, the image of the ancient tree releasing its accumulated life back into the network, feeding the future with the substance of its own long past. And understand that what you're imagining is not a metaphor, not a story we have invented to make the forest feel meaningful, but a real and documented process, something that happens in the dark beneath our feet in forests across the world. Something that has been happening since long before there were any minds to observe it, or any words to describe it. The forest does not need our wonder to sustain itself. It has been doing this work in the dark and the warmth and the slow chemistry of ancient soil since before we arrived to notice, and it will go on doing this work long after we have finished our small evening of attention and drifted into sleep. And the trees themselves, those great pillars of wood and time, those 1,000-year presences standing in the mist and the green light and the deep humid air of the rainforest, they send their slow messages downward into the dark soil and outward through the dark to trees standing 100 meters away, trees that may never touch branches or share a patch of sky, and yet are bound together by something older and quieter than any friendship we might imagine. And high above all of this, invisible in the darkness now, the canopy holds send their slow messages downward into the dark soil and outward through the dark to trees standing 100 meters away. Trees that may never touch branches or share a patch of sky, and yet are bound together by something older and quieter than any friendship we might imagine. And high above all of this, invisible in the darkness now, the canopy holds its breath for just a moment, that brief and trembling pause between two worlds. The world of day folding itself gently away, and the world of night opening its eyes for the first time. And what eyes they are! What extraordinary, luminous, impossible eyes belonging to creatures who have been waiting all this long bright day for exactly this moment, for the shadows to thicken and the last of the orange light to dissolve into the blue, and then the blue into the soft, absolute dark of a rainforest night. It happens gradually, the way sleep comes to you when you stop trying to find it. First, there is just a dimming, a softening at the edges, the greens going gray and the grays going deeper still, and then the canopy begins to change in a way that is almost impossible to describe unless you have felt it yourself, unless you have stood beneath that enormous vaulted ceiling of leaves and branches and felt the air shift, felt the temperature drop just a fraction, felt something like a collective exhale move through the whole living structure of the forest as the daytime animals settled into their roosts and their hollows and their safe-tucked sleeping places. And into that exhale, into that settling, something else begins to stir. Approximately 70% of all rainforest animals are nocturnal. Let that number sit with you for a moment. The way you might let a warm breath of air rest on your face before it passes. 70%. More than 2/3 of every creature living in this tremendous, layered, breathing world spends the daylight hours waiting, resting, tucked away in bark crevices and hollow branches and dense leaf clusters, waiting for the dark to arrive the way you might wait for a favorite song to come on with patient and familiar anticipation. What this means, what this truly means, is that the forest you might imagine you know when you picture it in daylight, bright and loud and full of calling birds and darting butterflies, that forest is only a fraction of what the rainforest actually is. The real forest, the fuller and more populated, and in many ways more wondrous forest, belongs to the night. The day is a quiet rehearsal. The night is the performance itself. And so they come, one by one, the way stars appear in a darkening sky, slowly at first, and then all at once. Too many to count, and each one singular and strange and beautiful. There is something profoundly moving about watching the nocturnal world wake up, if you are still enough and patient enough to witness it. Because each creature that stirs and stretches and opens its enormous eyes seems to carry with it a kind of private joy, a creature in its element, doing the thing it was shaped by millions of years of careful evolution to do, moving through darkness the way you move through your own home in the middle of the night, certain and unhurried, and perfectly at ease. Among the first to move is the slow loris, and you would be forgiven for stopping entirely if you ever came across one in the canopy, because it is one of those animals that seems less like a real creature and more like something remembered from a dream. Small and round, and impossibly soft-looking, with a face that is mostly two enormous golden brown eyes. The slow loris moves through the branches with a deliberate liquid grace that earned it the first half of its name. Though slow here does not mean uncertain, does not mean lost or confused. It means precise. It means considered. It means every single movement has been thought through before it is made, which is perhaps a kind of wisdom we could stand to borrow more often. Those eyes, those great forward-facing eyes, are not merely beautiful. They are engineering. They face forward in the way that predator eyes tend to, giving the loris extraordinary depth perception, the ability to judge distances in the dark with remarkable accuracy, to reach for a branch or a flower or a sleeping insect, and know exactly where it is and how far away it is, all without the benefit of daylight, all by the faint scattered glow of starlight filtering down through 10 million leaves above. The slow loris is one of the few venomous primates in the world, And this too is worth sitting with, because venom in a soft-eyed, gentle-moving creature feels like a contradiction, feels like finding something sharp hidden inside something tender. But nature is full of exactly these contradictions, these reminders that the living world is never only one thing, never entirely soft or entirely hard, never completely safe or completely dangerous, but always and forever both at once. Always holding opposite truths together in the same small body, the way a lullaby can be both soothing and quietly sad. The loris produces its venom in a gland near its elbow, activating it by licking the gland and mixing it with saliva. And while we could spend a great deal of time on the science of this, tonight, let it simply be a reminder that even the most gentle-seeming things in the natural world have their depths, their hidden complexities, their layers that reveal themselves only slowly and only to those patient enough to keep watching. Higher in the canopy, in the places where the branches grow thicker and more tangled, and the night-blooming flowers are just beginning to open their pale, sleepy petals, the kinkajou has also woken from its long golden day of sleep. The kinkajou is a creature that looks at first glance like several different animals deciding together to be one, with a face somewhere between a monkey and a small bear, enormous dark eyes, dense tawny fur, and a tail that curves and grips and reaches with the confident dexterity of an extra hand. That tail is called prehensile, meaning it can wrap itself around a branch and hold on with real strength, serving as a fifth limb when the kinkajou reaches for something far away or hangs suspended from a branch to reach a flower positioned just out of comfortable grasp. Watch a kinkajou move through the canopy at night, and you are watching an animal that has turned its entire body into a tool for navigating this three-dimensional leafy world. Every part of it useful, every part of it adapted, even its tongue, which is long and slender and perfect for reaching deep into the throats of flowers to find the nectar pooled at the bottom. And this is where the kinkajou becomes more than a charming large-eyed canopy wanderer, because those visits to flowers, those nightly explorations of the night-blooming blossoms, make the kinkajou something the forest cannot easily do without. As it travels from flower to flower in search of nectar, pollen clings to its fur, to its face, to that extraordinary tail, and it carries this pollen with it through the dark canopy, transferring it from blossom to blossom in exactly the way a bee does in daylight. Only larger, only warmer, only moving through a world lit only by the soft, diffuse glow of a sky seen through leaves, and by some quality of animal certainty that has no name in any human language. The flowers that kinkajous visit have evolved specifically to attract them and other nocturnal visitors, blooming only after dark, timing their opening to the rhythms of their pollinators the way a host times a party to when their guests will arrive. And this relationship, this nightly partnership between flower and animal, is one of those quiet miracles that the rainforest performs over and over without any audience except the stars and the darkness, and the other sleeping things who dream their green and leafy dreams in the branches all around. Many of the creatures moving through the canopy tonight share a particular gift, a feature so elegant in its simplicity that it is worth pausing on, worth letting your mind rest on for a moment, the way you might rest your hand on a warm stone. Behind the retina of each of their eyes lies a layer of tissue called the tapetum lucidum, which is a Latin phrase that means, with beautiful plainness, bright tapestry. This layer is reflective, like the inside of a mirror, and what it does is take any light that has already passed through the retina once and bounce it back through again, giving the light-sensitive cells of the eye a second chance to absorb it, doubling the amount of information the eye can gather from even the faintest available light. It is why the eyes of cats glow in headlights, Why the eyes of deer seem to shine at the edge of a forest road at night. Why, if you were to shine a small light up into the canopy of a rainforest after dark, you might find it looking back at you with dozens of paired glowing points, gold and amber and green, each one a creature watching you with infinitely more ease than you're watching it. The tapetum lucidum turns darkness into something almost useful, almost sufficient, almost enough, which is a kind of metaphor that it would be too easy to reach for, but that glows there quietly anyway, like eyes in the dark, like the idea that even in the deepest dark there are structures built for catching what little light remains. The moths are moving now too, big-bodied and soft-winged, their antennae trembling with the effort of reading the air, detecting the complex chemical messages that the night-blooming flowers send outward into the dark in enormous fragrant clouds. These flowers have spent millions of years learning to speak in exactly the frequency that moths and bats and other creatures of the night are tuned to hear, or rather to smell, because the night-blooming flowers of the rainforest have given up on color, mostly, have let their petals go pale, gone white or cream or the faintest possible yellow colors that are nearly invisible by day but that catch starlight beautifully, that glow faintly against the dark like small lamps left on in a window. What they have kept, what they have amplified and deepened and made extraordinary, is their scent. Because scent travels in the dark where color cannot. Scent drifts on air currents and spreads outward in invisible plumes that a moth can detect from many meters away, navigating toward the source of it the way you might follow the smell of something warm and good through a house in the early morning before you are fully awake. The pale petals serve as landing platforms, visible enough in low light to give a visitor something to aim for, and the fragrance serves as invitation and map and welcome all at once. There is something almost unbearably tender about this, about the flowers opening in darkness for visitors who will never see them the way we see them, about the whole transaction happening in the night, without ceremony or witness, a flower unfolding itself, a moth arriving, a small and necessary exchange taking place in the warm, dark canopy air, and then the moth departing, carrying something forward, and the flower remaining open, waiting for the next visitor, patient and pale and sweetly, powerfully fragrant in the invisible air. This is pollination. Yes, this is the technical term for what is happening, but it is also something that resists being only technical, something that keeps slipping out of the language of biology and into the language of care, of patience, of things arranged for the benefit of others without any awareness that this is what they are doing, which may be the purest form of generosity there is. The canopy at night is alive in a way that the word alive does not quite capture, that the word teeming gets closer to but still falls short of, because teeming suggests chaos, and what the canopy at night has is not chaos but something more like fullness, like a room where everyone has arrived and the conversation has found its own level, and everything is happening at once, but nothing is fighting for space. Everything has its place. The slow loris moving hand over careful hand along a branch 15 meters above the forest floor, the kinkajou suspended by its curling tail from a branch higher still, the moths tracing their fragrant invisible pathways through the warm air, the pale flowers catching what starlight filters down to them and holding it in their open petals, like small cupped hands full of water, and somewhere further up, where the uppermost branch is thin and open to the sky, bats stitching back and forth through the dark, on wings of leather and precision, navigating by the echoes of their own voices, hearing the shape of the world reflected back to them in sounds too high for us to know. All of this is happening right now, at this exact moment, in rainforests on multiple continents, in the Amazon basin and the Congo and the forests of Borneo and the islands of Southeast Asia. This same gradual awakening, This same 70% of the forest's creatures opening their tapetum gilded eyes and stepping out into the warm dark to do the things they were made to do. And the forest holds all of them, holds the sleeping and the waking both, holds the pale flowers and the searching moths, and the soft-footed lorises, and the hanging kinkages, and the bats, and the beetles, and the thousand other things moving through the dark right now that have no names we know, no names at all in any human language, living and moving and feeding and carrying pollen from flower to flower in a darkness that is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but presence, not the end of the day's story, but the beginning of its own much longer. Much more populated, much more quietly extraordinary chapter, and the canopy breathes around all of it. The leaves rustling just slightly in the warm, upward-moving air, the branches swaying in patterns too slow and large to see, unless you stood back far enough to watch the whole thing at once, which no one can, which perhaps is part of the point that some things can only be understood in pieces, in small glimpses. In single moths and single flowers and single pairs of glowing eyes encountered one at a time in the gentle dark, and what the canopy holds tonight, what it has always held on nights like this, and will hold on nights long after any of us are here to notice, is its own quiet nighttime world of pale flowers unfolding their petals in the darkness, as though the canopy itself is dreaming. Opening up soft white blooms to the warm night air and releasing fragrances so sweet and so diffuse they seem less like a scent and more like a feeling, drifting down through the layers of the forest to where the river, its own quiet nighttime world of pale flowers unfolding their petals in the darkness as though the canopy itself is dreaming, opening up soft white blooms to the warm night air and releasing fragrances so sweet and so diffuse they seem less like a scent and more like a feeling, drifting down through the layers of the forest to where the river moves and breathes in its own slow and ancient way, wide and dark and endlessly patient beneath the stars, carrying within itself a kind of secret that the forest has been keeping for longer than any human memory can reach. You are close to it now, close enough to hear the gentle sound of water moving over stone somewhere in the distance, a soft murmuring that seems to belong to the same register as breath and sleep, and the slow turning of the earth itself. The river does not hurry. It has never needed to. It moves at the pace of something that understands deep within its own nature that it has all the time in the world, that the journey it is making tonight is the same journey it has always made, and that the water flowing past you in this moment has passed this way before and will pass this way again, in forms and cycles too patient and too vast for any single night to contain. There is something extraordinary in that thought, if you let yourself hold it gently, the way you might hold a smooth stone in the palm of your hand, turning it slowly, feeling its weight. The water in this river is not simply water passing through. It is water that belongs to this place, water that has been cycling through the forest for millions of years, in an unbroken conversation between sky and soil and root and leaf and air. Scientists who study these systems speak of the rainforest as something remarkably close to self-sustaining when it comes to its own water supply. The forest, in a very real sense, waters itself. The rain that falls into the canopy is absorbed by roots and drawn upward through trunks and released from leaves back into the air, where it gathers into clouds and falls again, sometimes returning to almost exactly the same part of the forest from which it came. The same water molecules cycle through rain and soil and roots and atmosphere again and again in a loop, so complete and so elegant that it begins to feel less like a scientific process and more like a kind of breathing, a great slow inhalation and exhalation that the forest has been performing since long before there were words to describe it. A single large tree, standing somewhere above you in the darkness, with its roots reaching deep into the warm and living soil, releases something in the order of 200 liters of water vapor into the air each day. 200 liters lifted silently from the earth and breathed out through millions of tiny openings in the surfaces of leaves, rising invisibly into the air above the canopy without any sound or drama, simply passing from one form to another as naturally as the night passing into day. And there are hundreds of billions of such trees across the Amazon basin, each one contributing its quiet daily exhalation to the enormous invisible river of moisture that flows above the forest, high in the atmosphere where the clouds are born. Scientists have given a beautiful and slightly astonishing name to this phenomenon. They call them flying rivers. Aerial streams of water vapor moving through the sky above the forest, invisible and immense, carrying more water than the Amazon River itself carries in its wide brown channel toward the sea. More water than the Amazon? The thought is almost too large to hold comfortably in the mind at this hour, with sleep approaching and the sounds of the forest settling into their nighttime rhythms around you. But hold it gently and let it dissolve slowly, the way something sweet dissolves on the tongue, the way the scent of those pale flowers dissolving down through the layers of the canopy until it becomes simply part of the air, part of the feeling of being here. The flying rivers are real, and they are moving somewhere above you right now, even as you rest. Even as your breath slows and the weight of the day releases itself slowly from your shoulders and your back. High above the canopy, above the layer where the great eagles soar at dawn, above even the highest cumulus towers that build in the afternoon heat, there are rivers of air so laden with moisture that they flow and curve and follow their own invisible geography, carrying the forest's gift of water westward and southward to places that would otherwise be much drier, feeding rainfall across vast distances of South America in a process of distribution so generous and so consistent that the forest shapes the climate of an entire continent. The Amazon does not merely live within its landscape. It creates the landscape. It creates the rainfall that sustains it. It is, in the most literal sense, making itself possible, rain after rain after rain. And then there's the river itself, the one that you can hear now, the soft sound of it growing a little closer as the night deepens and the other sounds of the forest settle into their familiar patterns. The Amazon River carries approximately 1/5 of all the fresh water that flows into the world's oceans. 1/5 of everything, from this one river, from this one basin, from this one continuous breathing forest that stretches across a continent like a green lunged living thing too large for any single view to encompass. When the Amazon reaches the Atlantic, it pushes fresh water so far out to sea that sailors in the early centuries of European exploration could taste fresh water in the ocean long before they could see the land. Long before the coastline appeared on the horizon, the river had already announced itself, already altered the chemistry of the sea, already made its presence felt in the world in a way that was quiet and total and completely unhurried. That is the nature of this place. It does everything on a scale that defies the ordinary imagination, and it does all of it gently, slowly, without any apparent effort, the way the most profound things tend to happen. You are following the sound of the river now, moving through your imagination along a path where the undergrowth opens a little and the air changes in a way that you can feel before you can name it, becoming slightly cooler and slightly more luminous with moisture, a softness that settles against your skin like the finest cloth, like the sensation of stepping from one kind of quiet into a deeper one. The trees here near the riverbank are ancient and enormous. their buttress roots spreading wide across the ground like the fins of something vast and slow, stabilizing themselves in the thin tropical soil, reaching laterally because the deep bedrock is too far below to anchor in the usual ways, and so they have learned over countless generations to hold on differently, to spread themselves wide and low and patient, to grip the earth with breadth rather than depth. Everything in this forest has learned to make do with what is available, and to make that accommodation look like grace. The river comes into view, and it is, at this hour, at this particular angle of moonlight falling through a gap in the canopy where an old tree came down years ago and let the sky in, it is silver. Not gray, not black, silver. The way old mirrors are silver, the way the inside of an oyster shell is silver, the way certain dreams have a particular quality of light that is cooler and more luminous than ordinary daylight, and yet somehow warmer in feeling, more interior. The moonlit river appears this way because of something quite specific and quite beautiful, a combination of the sky itself reflected in the still surface of the water and the fine particulate matter suspended within the slow-moving current, tiny particles of sediment and organic material that diffuse the reflected light, scatter it gently, soften the sharp edge of a mirror image into something more like a glow, or diffuse and even luminosity that makes the river seem less like a surface and more like a source, as though the light were coming from within the water rather than from above it. You stand for a moment at the edge, where the roots of one of the great riverside trees trail their fingers into the water, and the mist begins to rise from the surface in thin and drifting threads. The mist is the river exhaling, giving a little of itself back to the air in an act of constant and uncalculated generosity. The same generosity that the trees perform all day above the canopy, the same generosity that the clouds perform when they release their weight as rain over the canopy and let it fall through the layers into the soil. Everything here is giving itself to everything else. Nothing is held back. Nothing is wasted. The water that left this river as vapor yesterday may already be drifting somewhere in the flying rivers overhead, gathering with other molecules that left other rivers and other leaves, forming new clouds that will return as rain to this very same stretch of forest within days or weeks. And the water molecules themselves, those tiny elegant structures of oxygen and hydrogen that have been pairing and separating and pairing again since long before the forest existed, will cycle through this system again and again for as long as the forest stands and breathes and dreams in its slow green way above the river. There is comfort in that, if you let it settle into you slowly, the way the mist is settling now against your face, a cool and almost weightless touch, barely there, more sensation than substance. The water cycle within a rainforest is so complete, so reciprocal, so deeply embedded in its own continuation, that to stand beside one of these rivers at night is to stand inside something that has no beginning and no end that you could point to, something that simply continues the way sleep continues through the night, turning and shifting and carrying you through its own interior geography without requiring anything from you, without asking you to navigate or to understand or to do anything at all except let go and be carried. The mist thickens slightly toward the center of the river where the water is deepest and moves most slowly, and out there in the silver center where the moonlight lies flat and still, you can just barely see the occasional disturbance, a ripple, a small circle expanding outward from nothing visible, a sign of something beneath the surface going about its own quiet business in the dark, a fish turning, a current shifting, a breath from the riverbed releasing itself upward through the water in a bubble too small to see but large enough to feel. The river is alive in the same way the forest is alive, in the same way the soil is alive, in the same way the air above you is alive with the invisible passage of water molecules beginning their next journey upward into the sky, Everything is in motion. Everything is in the process of becoming something else while remaining entirely itself. The river is still the river. The water is still the water. And yet nothing in this place is standing still. You breathe in, and the mist comes with the breath, cool and faintly sweet with the minerals of the river, with the green exhalations of the roots growing along the bank, with the complex and ancient chemistry of a place that has been doing this for longer than the human mind can truly comprehend, longer than the oldest stories, longer than the oldest mountains in most parts of the world, this river running through this forest in this patient and unhurried way, receiving the rain and releasing the vapor and receiving it again. Your exhale mingles with the mist. You have given something of yourself to the river now. In a very small and very real way, the water cycle has welcomed you in, accepted your breath into its own enormous breathing, and somewhere far above in the darkness where the clouds are building for tomorrow's afternoon rain, your breath is already part of what moves through the darkness as a ribbon of soft silver light, carrying water that has already made this same journey 1,000 times before, drawn up through roots and breathed out through leaves into clouds and fallen again as rain in an endless patient circulation that has been turning like a slow wheel for millions of years. The same water now cooling your skin as a mist that rises from the surface and drifts between the trees where a family of moves through the darkness as a ribbon of soft silver light, carrying water that has already made this same journey 1,000 times before, drawn up through roots and breathed out through leaves into clouds and fallen again as rain in an endless patient circulation that has been turning like a slow wheel for millions of years. The same water now cooling your skin as a mist that rises from the surface and drifts between the trees where a family of giant river otters has settled into their den along the muddy bank. Their breathing slow and synchronized in the way that deeply social creatures breathe when they are truly at rest, curled together in the particular warmth that only family can make, their sleek bodies rising and falling like a single dreaming thing. And out on the water, the night has taken full possession of everything. The river at night is not the same river you might imagine in daylight. It does not sparkle or rush or invite. It becomes something older, something that has returned to its original self after the polite performance of the daytime hours. The surface is black and still in the shallower reaches, broken only by the occasional ring where something unseen has moved. Some pressure from below has briefly kissed the air before withdrawing again into the dark. The trees along the bank lean over the water as they always do, their roots drinking slowly, their leaves releasing that fine, cool mist that drifts across your face like the softest possible reminder that you are alive and that the world is breathing all around you. Beneath the surface of that black water, a world of extraordinary complexity is conducting its ancient business in complete and total darkness, and it does so not through sight, which would be useless here where the water runs brown with tannins and sediment and the silt of 10,000 tributaries, but through senses that human beings have never possessed and can barely imagine. More than 3,000 species of freshwater fish move through these Amazonian waters, more than in any other river system on the entire Earth, and many of them have solved the problem of navigating absolute darkness in a way that seems almost like something from a dream. They generate weak electrical fields around their own bodies, a kind of invisible shimmering envelope of charge that extends out into the water around them. And when that field is disturbed, when it bends around a rock or ripples at the presence of another creature, the fish perceives the shape of the disturbance and knows what is there without ever needing to see it. This sense is called electroreception, and it is one of those quiet miracles that the natural world keeps tucked away in the dark places, gifts given to creatures who live where light cannot reach. a whole other grammar of perception written in the language of electricity rather than light. Imagine moving through a dark room and simply knowing through the electrical field your own body produces that there is a chair 3 feet to your left, a doorway ahead, another creature passing slowly behind you. This is how much of the river lives its life, in a constant electrical conversation with the world around it, a communication so subtle and continuous that it never stops, not even in sleep, if fish sleep at all, which some do in the most gentle and tentative way, hovering in slow currents, their bodies swaying like suspended leaves, their electrical sense still murmuring softly to them even in whatever rest they take. The river holds all of this life like a secret, and the night holds the river, and the forest holds the night. And somewhere in that layered darkness, a black caiman is moving. You might not see it. That is rather the point. The black caiman is the largest predator in the Amazon ecosystem, a creature that can reach more than 4 meters in length and whose ancestors looked essentially the same when the dinosaurs still walked the earth, which is to say that the black caiman has already survived everything the planet has ever thrown at it and has found no reason to change. It is a patient animal, profoundly patient, in the way that only very old lineages tend to be, as though the caiman carries within its body the accumulated unhurriedness of 100 million years and simply does not need to rush. It slides through the shallows near the bank with its eyes just above the waterline, those pale golden eyes that catch even the faintest light and give it back tenfold. And it is not hunting with its eyes alone. Along the broad, flat length of the caiman's jaw, in the skin just around the snout and face, there are small pits, dozens of them arranged in rows, and these are not merely texture or decoration. They are sensory organs that detect heat, that read the thermal signature of the air and water around the animal with extraordinary precision, so that even when the darkness is total, even when no moonlight penetrates and no bioluminescence glimmers, the caiman still perceives the world in warm and cool, in the faint heat given off by a living body near the surface of the water, in the slight warmth of a fish moving just beneath. And beyond even that, the caiman's hearing is exceptionally acute, capable of detecting the most delicate low-frequency vibrations traveling through the water. The kind of vibrations that a fish makes simply by swimming, the pressure waves of movement that travel outward through the river like the quietest possible announcement of presence. So the caiman lies in the shallows, neither fully in the water nor fully out of it, suspended in the boundary between elements, as it has always been, a creature of edges, and it listens. It feels, it reads the heat of the living world around it, and it waits with a stillness so complete that it seems less like an animal resting and more like the riverbank itself deciding very slowly to have opinions. This is the primeval patience of the earth, and watching it, or even imagining it here in the dark as you rest, there is something that settles in you in response, some answering stillness that your own body has been waiting for permission to find. The caiman does not hurry. The river does not hurry. The whole enormous machine of the Amazon operates on a time scale that makes hurry seem not just unnecessary but almost absurd, a human invention that the forest simply does not recognize. The giant river otters sleeping in their den along the bank are, in their waking hours, among the most energetic and vocal and socially complex animals in the entire ecosystem, which is why their current stillness feels so meaningful, like a gift they are giving to the night. Each adult otter needs to eat up to 3 kilograms of fish every single day, which requires considerable effort and considerable cooperation, because the giant river otter is fundamentally a family animal, living in tight-knit groups that hunt together and raise their young together and communicate with each other in a vocabulary of more than 9 distinct vocalizations, a repertoire that includes sounds for greeting and alarm and contentment and coordination. Sounds that travel through the dense riverside air with startling clarity, so that a family of otters communicating during a morning hunt is one of the loudest and most cheerfully chaotic things the rainforest has to offer. But now they sleep. The vocalizations are stilled. The family breathes together in the dark, and the river moves past the entrance to their den, and the night continues its ancient administration of the forest without needing anything from them at all. There is something deeply comforting about the idea of all this sleeping, all this rest distributed through the darkness of the Amazon, creatures great and small tucked into their particular corners of the night. The metabolism of the whole ecosystem dropping into its lowest and most regenerative register while the nocturnal world conducts its own careful business in the shadows. The sleeping and the waking exist simultaneously here, layered over each other, the diurnal creatures folded into their roosts and dens and nests, while the night shift creatures move through the spaces the daytime animals have left behind, and somehow it all holds together, this intricate scheduling of life, this elegant division of the hours. And then there is the boto. There is no creature in the Amazon quite like the boto, the Amazon River dolphin, and no creature perhaps anywhere that carries quite the same mixture of the scientifically extraordinary and the mythologically sacred. The boto moves through the dark river with the easy confidence of a creature that has called these waters home for millions of years, its long snout probing into the flooded forest floor during the wet season, hunting fish and crustaceans in the submerged roots and branches with a flexibility that no ocean dolphin possesses. Its neck uniquely unfused so that it can turn its head nearly 90 degrees and navigate the drowned labyrinth of the flooded forest with a kind of relaxed certainty that seems almost architectural, as though it has memorized every branch. The boto is pink, not faintly pink, not pink in certain lights, but genuinely, unmistakably, luminously pink, a color that seems to belong more to the world of imagination than to the world of biology, and yet the biology is straightforward and quietly beautiful. The blood vessels that give other dolphins their coloring run close to the surface of the boto's skin, covered by only a thin layer, so that the warm blood moving through the capillaries just beneath gives the animal its extraordinary color, makes it look as though it is lit from within, as though the life moving through it is visible from the outside. Older botos who have spent more years in the river and whose skin has been abraded by time and passage through submerged branches and rough substrate tend to be pinker still, their color deepening with age the way some things only become more beautiful as they wear down to their essential selves. The indigenous peoples of the Amazon have lived alongside the boto for longer than any written record can trace, and across many of the cultures of the river basin, the boto is considered sacred, wrapped in myth and protected by a reverence that has kept it from being hunted in ways that many other river animals have not been spared. There are stories of botos who transform at night, who shed their river form and walk among people in the shape of beautiful strangers, mysterious and seductive, and then slip back into the water before dawn. Whether you receive that story as mythology or as metaphor or simply as the kind of truth that doesn't need to be literal to be real, it speaks to something that people who live alongside the boto seem to feel when they encounter it. A sense of presence, of a creature that exists at the edge of two worlds, that carries something the daylight doesn't quite explain. To see a boto surface in the moonlight is to understand why stories grew up around it. The pale pink body breaks the surface of the dark water with a softness, a gentleness that seems almost deliberate, as though the animal is being careful not to disturb too much, and then it is gone again, and the water closes, and you are left wondering for a moment whether you saw what you think you saw, whether the river simply offered you a vision and then took it back. The Bodo navigates by echolocation, sending out pulses of sound that travel through the dark water and return to it as information, mapping the submerged world in 3 dimensions through sound, the way the black caiman maps it through heat, the way the knife fish maps it through electricity. Every major nocturnal animal in the river has found its own solution to the problem of darkness, its own private language for reading a world it cannot see, and taken together these solutions form a kind of chorus of perception, a web of senses so varied and so interconnected that the river at night is not a place of blindness but a place of extraordinary sensitivity, alive with information that moves through it in frequencies and forms that have nothing to do with the visible light that daylight creatures depend upon. Your own body, resting now in whatever warmth and quiet you have found, is doing something not entirely dissimilar, though far more simple. The senses you use in daylight are dimming as sleep approaches. The visual world behind your eyelids has grown dark, and what remains is the feeling of your own breath, the soft pressure of the surface beneath you, the sounds of the room or the night around you rendered harmless and rhythmic by the particular alchemy of sleepiness. You are becoming, in your own small way, a creature of the dark, navigating by sensation rather than sight. And the dark is gentle, and the dark is kind, and the dark is where rest lives. Out on the river, beneath the canopy that holds the stars at a respectful distance, a small group of river dolphins turns slowly beneath the surface, their pale pink forms catching the moonlight like living lanterns drifting through the black water, unhurried and ancient, surfacing now and then with a soft breath that breaks the silence for just a moment before the river closes over them again, and the forest resumes its deep and undisturbed breathing. The same breathing that has been keeping the whole planet alive since long before the first river dolphins turned slowly beneath the surface, their pale pink forms catching the moonlight like living lanterns drifting through the black water, unhurried and ancient, surfacing now and then, with a soft breath that breaks the silence for just a moment before the river closes over them again, and the forest resumes its deep and undisturbed breathing. The same breathing that has been keeping the whole planet alive since long before the first. Human memory stretched back far enough to hold the thought. And this is the part of the story that deserves its own kind of quiet, its own careful reverence, because what we are resting inside tonight, even from this great distance, even through the soft veil of imagination and sleep, is not simply a landscape. It is a living library. It is the oldest room in the world, and it has been here, in one form or another, for approximately 300 million years. 300 million years. Let that number drift through you like water moving through deep stone. At that time, the continents we know had not yet separated into their familiar shapes. The world was arranged differently, the sky held different proportions of gas, the creatures walking and swimming and crawling through the ancient light would have been unrecognizable to us. And yet, in the warm and humid equatorial zones of that primordial earth, something very much like a tropical forest was already breathing, already cycling moisture into clouds, already weaving its roots through the dark soil in that patient and methodical way that forests have always done. Rainforests have survived not one but multiple mass extinction events, those catastrophic moments when the great wheel of life lurched and shuddered and vast swaths of species were swept away. Through all of it, through volcanic winters and asteroid impacts and the slow grind of ice ages, the tropical forest held on. It bent and it changed, Species came and went within its canopy, like guests passing through a very old house, but the house itself endured. The architecture of warmth and moisture and layered green life proved to be something close to indestructible, or at least close to it, and we will get to the caveat in that sentence in its own time in another part of this story. For now, let the 300 million years simply be what it is. A duration so vast it makes even the oldest mountain ranges feel young. A continuity so deep it makes the entire span of human civilization feel like a single breath drawn and slowly, gently released. And yet into this ancient world, not so very long ago in geological time, human beings arrived, or perhaps did not so much arrive as slowly, gradually, across generations and generations of wandering, find their way into the green and breathing dark of the Amazon and decide with the quiet certainty of people who recognize a home to stay. The evidence suggests that indigenous peoples have been living within and carefully tending the Amazon rainforest for at least 11,000 years. 11,000 years of continuous relationship between human communities and this particular place on Earth. 11,000 years of learning the names of things, of watching which plants bloomed in which season, of noticing what the animals knew, of following the river's moods through flood and drought, of building up, generation by patient generation, an understanding of this place so intricate and so precise that it still outpaces in many crucial respects what Western science has been able to document in the few centuries it has turned its attention toward the forest. Imagine the accumulation of that knowledge. Think about what 11,000 years means in terms of human lives, of grandmothers and grandfathers sitting with grandchildren at the edges of firelight, passing along what they have learned. Think about the sheer number of observations contained in that span of time, the careful attention paid to plant and animal and water and sky across hundreds of generations, each one adding to the collection, each one refining what came before, each one learning something new about the forest that surrounded them so completely and provided so abundantly. This is not knowledge kept in books or stored in digital archives. It is knowledge that lives in people, in the language itself, in ceremony and story, and the practiced movement of hands preparing medicine, or preparing food, or preparing the soil for planting. It is knowledge that breathes, that changes, that is alive in the same way the forest itself is alive. And speaking of soil, there is something here that deserves a moment of particular wonder, a small miracle hiding in the ground beneath the great trees. Scattered across the Amazon basin, in areas that were once home to large and sophisticated pre-Columbian civilizations, researchers have found patches of extraordinarily dark and fertile earth. The local name for it is terra preta, which translates simply and beautifully as dark earth. And what makes it remarkable is not just its color, but its origin and its enduring vitality. This soil was created deliberately and skillfully by the peoples who lived here through the careful burning of organic material and the composting of bones and plant matter and other biological waste through practices refined over centuries into something approaching an art form. The result is a soil so rich, so biologically active, so perfectly structured for supporting plant life, that it remains among the most fertile soils on Earth even today, thousands of years after the people who created it are gone. Normal Amazonian soil, when the forest is cleared, tends toward a reddish clay that is surprisingly poor in nutrients, because in the living rainforest almost all the nutrients are held in the biomass itself, rather than in the ground below. But terra preta breaks that rule entirely. It is dark and deep and full of the microscopic life that makes plants thrive, And it is a testament to what can happen when a people truly knows a place, when their relationship with the land is old enough and attentive enough to produce something lasting, something that outlives them and continues to give long after they have gone. There is a quality to that image that I find quietly moving, especially in the stillness of the night. The idea that knowledge and care, applied patiently and skillfully over many generations, can change the very ground beneath your feet. That human hands and human wisdom can leave a gift in the soil for futures they will never see. The trees above us in this imagined forest tonight may be rooted in earth that was tended by hands thousands of years ago, and those roots do not know or care about the history. They simply drink the richness in and grow and grow and grow. The same quality of accumulated knowing that shaped the dark earth also shaped over those 11,000 years. Something even more profound and perhaps even more consequential for the world beyond the forest. The indigenous communities of the Amazon have documented and developed uses for more than 7,000 plant species for medicinal purposes. 7,000 plants. 7,000 distinct relationships between human bodies and the chemical compounds that the forest produces, relationships discovered not through laboratory experiments or systematic clinical trials, but through something older and in its own way more rigorous, through observation, through experimentation conducted across generations, through the kind of careful attention to cause and effect that a people pays when their survival depends on getting it right. A healer who misidentifies a plant, who mistakes a poisonous vine for a healing one, does not pass that mistake along. A healer who finds the bark that reduces a fever, who knows the root that calms inflammation, who understands which preparation of a given plant is safe and which is dangerous, passes that knowledge forward with great care, teaches it as something precious, because it is. And here is where the forest's deep history connects directly to the world most of us inhabit, to the medicine cabinet in the bathroom, to the pharmacy on the corner, to the hospitals and clinics that treat our bodies when they fail. Approximately a quarter of all modern pharmaceutical drugs are derived from or directly modeled on compounds that were first identified in rainforest plants by indigenous healers. A quarter, 1 in every 4. The drugs that manage pain and fight infection and treat certain cancers and regulate blood pressure, many of them trace their origins back to a moment when a healer deep in the Amazon or somewhere else along the equatorial band of forest that girdles the earth recognized something in a plant and shared that recognition with their community, and the knowledge spread and deepened, and eventually, through pathways long and complex and not always kind or fair, made its way into the laboratories where chemists isolated and named and synthesized the compounds that had been working quietly in those plants for millions of years before any human hand ever touched them. The forest did not create those compounds for us. It created them for itself, as defenses against insects and fungi and bacteria and browsers, as chemical signals and hormonal regulators and structural supports for its own biological processes. But the forest had been experimenting with chemistry for so much longer than we have that its solutions were already elegant, already refined, already optimized in ways that our laboratories are still working to fully understand. And the people who learned to read that chemistry, who learned which of the forest's thousands of chemical experiments produced something useful to a human body, those people spent thousands of years doing that reading, and what they accumulated in doing so is a body of knowledge so valuable that it has shaped the medicine of the entire world. Tonight, somewhere in the Amazon, a healer may be preparing a remedy using a plant whose properties their grandmother taught them, properties that were taught to that grandmother by her grandmother, in an unbroken chain of knowing that stretches back further than any of them can trace, back into the deep past of the forest, back into the time when the forest was the whole world their people knew and loved and depended upon entirely. That chain of knowledge is not a relic or an artifact. It is alive. It is still being practiced, still being passed on, still being refined and added to, still discovering things that the outside world has not yet found. And the forest around those healers is still holding its 10,000 other secrets patiently in its bark and its roots and its leaves, waiting as it has always waited in that unhurried way that only something 300 million years old can truly afford to wait. Let the darkness of the forest tonight feel like that kind of patience. Let the slow sounds of it, the creak of branch, the drip of water, the distant call of a night bird, settle into you the way deep time settles, gently and without urgency, smoothing everything it touches into something quieter and more at ease. You are resting alongside something incomprehensibly old and incomprehensibly knowing. You do not need to understand all of it. You do not need to hold all of it at once. The forest does not require that of you. It simply breathes as it has always breathed and asks only that you breathe along with it for a little while, matching your small rhythm to its enormous one, feeling the way your own brief and tender life is held within something so much larger, so much older, so much more continuous than you could ever be alone. The pink dolphins have moved further down the river now, their dreaming shapes dissolving into the black current, and the trees lean over the water as they have always done, trailing their roots and their reflections in the slow dark flow, and above them the stars turn in their ancient patterns over a canopy that was ancient before the stars received their names from human tongues, before the first. Human voice spoke words into this green cathedral and heard the forest answer back in rustling and rain, and the calls of birds whose names in those first languages were themselves a kind of love, and the knowledge passed from hand to hand like a slow flame carried through millennia, knowledge of which bark soothes a fever and which root calms a restless mind, knowledge that the forest itself seems to offer freely to those who listen closely enough to hear the way the trees breathe in the dark, the way the canopy itself seems to exhale at dusk, releasing into the cooling air something older and softer than silence, something that has been accumulating in leaf and root and rain-soaked earth for longer than memory can reach. And what the forest breathes out, we breathe in. This is not metaphor. This is chemistry. This is the body recognizing, at a cellular level, compounds it has known before. Compounds shaped by millions of years of coevolution between animal nervous systems and the green intelligence of plants that learned it long ago that a calm creature is a gentle one, that a sleeping animal does less harm than a waking one, that there is something mutually beneficial in this ancient chemical conversation where the forest offers rest, and the creature accepts it and lies down among the roots and becomes for a little while as still and as trusting as a fallen leaf. Many of the plants that grow in the deep rainforest and in the warm, humid ecosystems that edge and echo it produce compounds that speak directly to the human brain in a language it already knows. They produce molecules that resemble adenosine, that small and patient chemical messenger your brain has been accumulating since the moment you woke this morning, building steadily all day in the spaces between your neurons, pressing gently and insistently against the receptors that govern your sense of tiredness, whispering to your body that the work of waking is finished, that the time for dissolving into sleep is near. The rainforest, in its vast chemical generosity, makes molecules that carry this same whisper. Plants that have never met a human nervous system have nonetheless, through the slow grammar of evolution, learned to speak its language. And when those compounds find their way into the body, through tea, through tincture, Through the simple act of breathing deeply in a place where the air is thick with the exhalations of 1,000 species, the brain listens, the receptors respond. The eyelids grow heavy with something that feels less like fatigue and more like permission. Think of valerian, that root that smells of earth and old wood, that has been pressed into the service of human sleep for so long that references to it appear in texts from ancient Greece, from medieval herbalism, from traditions that reach back to before writing itself. Valerian grows not in the deep Amazonian interior, but in the temperate zones that share a kind of kinship with rainforest-adjacent ecosystems, humid and layered, rich with the kind of biological density that produces pharmacological complexity. The compounds in valerian root, valerianic acid among them, have been studied in clinical settings with all the careful apparatus of modern science, and what those studies have found confirms what every grandmother who ever brewed a cup of valerian tea already knew. It reduces anxiety. It improves sleep quality. It shortens the time between lying down and drifting away. It does this not by forcing the brain into unconsciousness, but by quieting the noise, by reducing the electrical chatter that keeps the anxious mind circling its worries like a moth around a lamp, by gently lowering the volume until the underlying silence becomes audible and the body remembers that it already knows how to sleep, that sleep is not something to be achieved, but something to be allowed. Passion flower grows in tangles and cascades across the edges of forest and field, its blooms so elaborate and strange that the Spanish missionaries who first encountered it in the Americas believed they saw in its structure a representation of the Passion of Christ, the crown of thorns and the corona, the nails and the stamens, the wounds and the deep purple petals. They named it for what they saw, but the plant had its own name in the languages of the people who had always lived near it. Languages that encoded its uses and its character in sounds, shaped by long familiarity. The flavonoids in passion flower, particularly chrysin, interact with the same receptors in the brain that respond to the class of compounds we now call benzodiazepines, the same receptors targeted by pharmaceutical sleep aids, but they do so gently, without the dependency, without the grogginess, with a softness that feels more like the forest itself than like a laboratory. Clinical studies have shown measurable improvements in sleep quality among people who take passion flower extract, measurable reductions in anxiety, measurable shifts toward the parasympathetic state of calm that is the necessary precondition for sleep. The plant offers this freely. It has always offered this freely. And then there is kava, which comes from the Pacific Islands where the rainforest meets the ocean in a different kind of profusion, where the air is salt and green and heavy with moisture, where the roots of the kava plant, Piper methysticum, have been ground and strained into ceremonial drinks for thousands of years. Kava contains kava-lactonase, compounds that reduce anxiety and promote relaxation through mechanisms that are still being mapped and understood, acting on the limbic system, on the pathways that govern emotional tone, on the channels that regulate the threshold between alert and at ease. To drink kava in the way it is traditionally prepared and offered is to participate in a ritual of communal unwinding, a ceremony of collective permission to set down the weight of the day and rest into the present moment, into the company of others, into the kind of drowsy sociability that is itself a form of care. The science confirms what the ceremony has always known, that these compounds work, that they carry the forest's chemistry into the body and ask the nervous system to soften. But perhaps the most quietly remarkable of all these forest pharmacologists is the Amazonian vine called Banisteriopsis caapi, which climbs the great trees of the Amazon basin in thick woody spirals, its bark rough and brown, its presence fundamental to one of the most complex and carefully managed shamanic traditions in the world. The vine contains harmine and harmaline, compounds that belong to a family called beta-carbolines, and what these compounds do, among other things, is interact with the brain's serotonin system, the same system that governs mood and emotional regulation, and the delicate neurochemistry of sleep, the same system that modern antidepressants attempt to modulate through pharmaceutical means. Harmine was in fact first called telepathine by the scientists who isolated it, because they could not quite believe that a plant growing in the Amazonian rainforest could produce something with such a specific and profound effect on the human mind. And in their astonishment, they reached for a word that implied something beyond the merely but it was always chemistry. Beautiful, ancient, co-evolved chemistry. The vine learned over geological time to produce compounds that speak to the serotonin receptors of the animals that live among it. And those animals, including the humans who have lived in and with the Amazon for thousands of generations, learn to recognize that speech and respond to it. The forest is not passive in any of this. The forest is not simply a warehouse of useful compounds waiting to be discovered and extracted. The forest is a living system in constant chemical communication with itself and with everything that moves through it. The trees talk to each other through the mycorrhizal networks beneath the soil, sending sugars and distress signals through the fungal threads that connect root to root. The flowers signal to the insects with ultraviolet patterns invisible to human eyes. The leaves release volatile compounds when they are damaged, warning neighboring plants to prepare their own chemical defenses. And at night, this is the part that feels, somehow, like the most tender piece of the whole story. Many plants undergo something called nyctinasty, which is the technical name for the folding of leaves at night, that slow and gentle closing that happens across the rainforest canopy as darkness falls. Nyctinasty. Even the word is soft. It comes from the Greek for night, nyx, and it describes the way certain plants respond to the falling of light with a kind of withdrawal, a drawing inward, a conservation of moisture and energy that looks to the watching human eye uncannily like sleep. The leaves of mimosa fold, the leaves of clover close. The petals of wood sorrel press together like hands in prayer. This is not sleep in the neurological sense. Plants do not have nervous systems, do not cycle through REM and slow wave stages, do not dream as far as we know. But there is something functionally equivalent happening. Something that occupies the same ecological niche that sleep occupies in animal life. A reduction of exposure, a conservation of resources, a turning inward that allows the organism to restore what the day has spent. The forest at night is not simply dark. It is in the act of closing. It is practicing in its own botanical way the same withdrawal from the waking world that your body is now beginning to practice, that your breath is already beginning to model. And underneath all of this, woven through the roots and the rain-soaked soil, are the bacteria. There are always the bacteria. Life began with bacteria, and in some ways never moved beyond them. They remain the deepest and most essential layer of every living system on Earth, and the soil of the rainforest floor is one of the most bacteria-rich environments on the planet. A dark and teeming world of decomposition and renewal where the chemistry of death becomes the chemistry of life, becomes the chemistry of sleep. Among the many things these soil bacteria produce is a compound called geosmin. Geosmin is the molecule responsible for the smell of rain on Earth, that deep and primal scent that rises when the first drops hit dry or damp soil. That smell that has a name, petrichor, because it is so specific and so universally recognized, and so unanimously loved that it demanded a word of its own. Petrichor, from the Greek petra, stone, and ichor, the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods. The god blood of stones, the smell that makes something loosen in the chest when the first rain comes. And it is not only poetry that explains why this smell affects us the way it does. Studies measuring physiological responses to geosmin and to the smell of petrichor have found that human heart rate decreases measurably in its presence. The nervous system shifts. The body relaxes. There is something in the neurology of smell, the fact that olfactory signals bypass the thalamus and travel directly to the amygdala and the hippocampus, to the oldest and most emotionally primitive parts of the brain, that makes the smell of rain on Earth register not just as pleasant but as safe as home, as a signal that goes back through the long corridor of human evolutionary history to a time when rain meant water and water meant survival, and the smell of the saturated earth meant that the hard part was over and it was possible now to rest. To walk into a rainforest after rain, or to simply let the mind go there now, in the softness of this almost sleeping, is to be bathed in geosmin, in the complex volatile chemistry of 10,000 plant species exhaling together in air that is thick with the molecular evidence of life in every direction. It is to breathe in adenosine-adjacent compounds that press gently on the sleep receptors. It is to move through an atmosphere laced with the secondary metabolites of plants that have been in chemical conversation with primate nervous systems for longer than our species has had language. It is to walk into a pharmacy that has no walls and no counter, only green light filtering down through 100 layers of canopy, and the sound of water somewhere always, and the deep, rich, living smell of soil that has been alive for millions of years. The trees know in their botanical way when darkness comes. They have light-sensitive proteins in their leaves, phytochromes that shift their configuration as the wavelength of available light changes toward the longer, redder frequencies of evening. And this shift triggers the cellular machinery of nyctinasty, that slow and graceful closing that moves through the forest like a wave as night arrives. The sensitive plant folds. The prayer plant lifts its leaves upward as if in supplication. The wood sorrel presses its leaflets together like a book being gently closed at the end of a long reading. And in this closing, there is something that the human body, lying in its own darkness, listening to the forest through the medium of language and memory and the chemical traces of a world it has always been part of, can recognize and respond to, can feel in the slowing of its own breath, in the heaviness gathering behind its eyes, in the way the thoughts are beginning to lose their edges and blur into something softer and less insistent. You are not separate from this. You have never been separate from this. Your sleep is the same phenomenon as the folding of leaves, scaled up into the complexity of a nervous system that can dream, that can lie in a bed in a lit and modern world and still carry within it every evolutionary memory of lying down in the dark under the canopy while the rain came in. Your adenosine receptors were shaped in relationship to plants that produce adenosine-like compounds. Your amygdala was shaped to relax in the presence of geosmin. Your nervous system is a forest in miniature, chemical and electrical, layered and complex, and it knows, as the forest knows when it is time to fold toward darkness and close. The rain is always falling somewhere in the Amazon. Right now, as you lie in your stillness, somewhere in that green enormity water is falling through 100 feet of canopy and arriving at the forest floor changed, filtered, carrying the chemistry of every leaf it touched on its way down, and where it meets the soil, it releases that ancient smell, and the bacteria in the soil are going about their timeless work of transformation, and the vines are climbing. And somewhere, a mimosa is beginning to fold its leaves gently inward as the night deepens, drawing themselves quietly into a stillness that mirrors the stillness now moving through your own body, a chemical conversation between plant and animal, and the slow-turning darkness that has always governed when living things rest, your breath following the same ancient rhythm as the closing petals. Each exhale releasing a little more of the day until there is only the soft green darkness and the distant sound of water moving somewhere far beneath the roots, a sound so low and so constant that it has become indistinguishable from silence itself, the way a heartbeat becomes indistinguishable from the body that carries it, present in everything, noticed only in the moments between moments when you remember to listen. And so you listen now, not with effort, but with the soft, open attention of someone already half dreaming, someone whose edges have begun to blur pleasantly at the boundaries where self ends and world begins. The rainforest at its deepest hour does not announce itself. It does not perform its darkness for any audience. It simply continues, breathing in and breathing out, cycling and releasing and renewing in ways that have nothing to do with being watched and everything to do with being alive. The Amazon at deepest night is a thing of extraordinary, unhurried complexity. Consider the canopy above you, those vast interconnected layers of leaf and branch and vine that biologists spend entire lifetimes trying to understand. In the gentlest of breezes, and there is always a breeze up there, always some small conversation of air moving through the uppermost branches, the canopy oscillates in slow, rhythmic waves. The movement is subtle, almost invisible from below, a soft undulation like the breathing of something immense. Scientists who study forest dynamics have measured this rhythm, this back and forth swaying of leaves and stems in still night air, and they have found that the frequency of that movement, that slow oscillation, falls somewhere between half a cycle per second and 2 cycles per second. Such a small number, such a vast, quiet motion. Now consider what is happening inside your mind at this very moment. If you were connected to an electroencephalogram, those gentle sensors placed like a crown against your scalp, the machine would be beginning to detect something remarkable as your consciousness slides deeper towards sleep. In the stage called slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative stage, what scientists designate N3, your brain waves slow to their most fundamental rhythm. The electrical activity of billions of neurons, firing and quieting, and firing again in those vast coordinated waves that wash across the brain like tides across a shore, settles into oscillations of between half a hertz and 2 hertz, between half a cycle per second and 2 cycles per second. The same frequency, the canopy swaying in the dark, the sleeping brain moving through its own slow tide. 2 utterly different systems, one made of bark and chlorophyll and the accumulated weight of centuries, one made of neurons and myelin and the soft architecture of memory and dreaming, and yet they find themselves in the deepest hours rocking at the same tempo. This is not coincidence arranged for poetry. This is something stranger and more wonderful. The way that life, given enough time and enough variation, tends to discover the same elegant solutions, the same necessary rhythms, as if the universe itself had a preference for certain frequencies, certain ways of being at rest. There is a tree somewhere above you now. You can feel it even with your eyes closed, that vast presence pressing gently against the underside of consciousness, its roots a mirror image of its branches, reaching down as far as it reaches up, drinking from the same aquifer that has been feeding trees in this place for thousands of years. The roots are working now, even in the dark. The mycorrhizal networks are exchanging sugars and signals. The phloem is moving its slow cargo of nutrients through the inner bark. The whole tree is, in a sense, engaged in maintenance, in the careful tending of itself that can only happen when the energy of photosynthesis is no longer required, when the sun's demands have finally released their hold and the tree can turn its resources inward. Your body is doing exactly this. Right now, in this moment, as your breath slows and your muscles soften, and the last bright edges of waking thought begin to dissolve, your cells are quietly beginning their night work. Growth hormone, released in pulses timed to the rhythm of your deepest sleep, moves through your bloodstream like a foreman walking through a building after closing time, checking what needs repair, signaling the crews to begin. Proteins that were damaged during the day are broken down and rebuilt. Tissues that were stressed by movement and use and the simple metabolic labor of being alive are carefully, precisely restored. Your immune system, which during waking hours must remain alert and reactive, now has the resources and the stillness it needs to consolidate its defenses, to strengthen the cellular memories of what it has encountered, to prepare for whatever the coming day might bring. Memory, too, is being tended. Everything you experience today, every face and conversation, and small sensory detail that made its way through the gates of attention, is being quietly sorted and filed and woven into the larger fabric of who you are. The hippocampus, that curved and ancient structure deep in the brain, coordinates with the cortex in a slow overnight dialogue, replaying experiences, stripping away what is not needed, strengthening the neural pathways that carry what matters. You will wake remembering what you need to remember. You will wake with connections forged that you did not consciously make. Sleep is not the absence of thought. It is thought moving at a different depth, in different language, doing different work. And then there is the extraordinary thing that was only discovered in 2012 when a neuroscientist named Maiken Nedergaard and her colleagues at the University of Rochester made an observation that quietly changed the way we understand what sleep is for. They found that during sleep, and specifically during the deep slow wave stages, the channels between the brain cells expand significantly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow through in far greater volume than during waking hours. This fluid acts as a kind of rinse, moving through the spaces of the brain and carrying away the metabolic waste products that accumulate during a day of thinking and feeling and perceiving. Proteins associated with neurological decline, the byproducts of cellular energy use, the accumulated debris of consciousness. They called this system the glymphatic system, and it works only or almost only when you sleep. It is one of the most elegant discoveries in modern neuroscience, and one of the most clarifying. Your brain is not simply resting during sleep. Your brain is being washed. It is being carefully, systematically cleaned, the way a stream runs clear in the early morning when the silt has had time to settle, the way rain washes the surfaces of leaves so that they can breathe again when the light returns. In the forest, this same logic governs the work of decomposition. The fungi and bacteria and invertebrates of the forest floor are the nighttime custodians of the ecosystem, breaking down the fallen leaves and branches and organic matter that would otherwise accumulate and choke the living systems above them. They are not glamorous workers. Their labor is invisible, conducted in the dark, beneath the surface, without fanfare. But without them, nothing above could continue. Without the slow, patient work of decomposition, the nutrients locked in dead matter could never be returned to the soil, could never rise again through roots and stems toward light. The forest's ability to renew itself, to send up new growth each season, to survive and expand across centuries, depends entirely on this quiet nightly tending. Your glymphatic system is your own forest floor, your own night crew, your own invisible custodians working without fanfare in the spaces between your cells, clearing the way for tomorrow's thinking, for tomorrow's feeling, for the next day's entire luminous experience of being a conscious creature moving through a world of extraordinary, inexhaustible complexity. There is something else happening now that you may have already noticed. Something so gradual and so gentle that it seems less like a change and more like a settling. Your body is cooling, not dramatically, not uncomfortably, but by 1 or 2 degrees over the course of the evening, a slow and reliable descent that is among the most powerful physiological triggers for sleep that researchers have identified. The cooling of your core temperature is not a side effect of sleep. It is, in a real sense, a cause of it. Your body dropping its internal thermostat is a signal to every system within you. The long work of the day is done. It is safe to let go now. It is time to repair. The forest cools the same way. As the sun withdraws and the stored heat of the day slowly radiates upward into the open sky, the temperature at the forest floor drops by degrees. The air that was thick and close and warm with the day's metabolic exhalation becomes something cooler, something that moves differently, that carries different information. Animals whose biology is tied to temperature respond to this cooling, their own physiological states shifting in ways that mirror the shift of the environment. Even the trees whose cell processes slow in cooler temperatures are, in a sense, following the same instruction. The light is gone, the heat is going, the time for outward growth and reaching is over. The time for inward work has begun. You are part of this. You have always been part of this. Even insulated as you are by walls and blankets and all the comfortable architecture of a modern resting place, your biology still listens for the cooling, still takes its instruction from the same ancient signal that has been guiding sleeping creatures for longer than any of us can imagine. There is a deep comfort in recognizing this. You are not separate from the forest's rhythm. You are an instance of it, a particular expression of the same fundamental pattern, a living system running the same restorative program under a different sky. The Amazon has been called the lungs of the earth, and this is true in ways that go beyond simple metaphor. The rainforest breathes, absorbing carbon and releasing oxygen in quantities that help regulate the atmosphere of the entire planet. Cycling water vapor in volumes so vast that scientists speak of rivers in the sky, of aerial rivers flowing above the treetops and eventually falling as rain across entire continents. What the forest exhales becomes what we inhale. What we exhale, in turn, feeds the forest. This is a conversation that has been running without interruption for hundreds of millions of years, and it is running right now in the dark as you lie still and breathe. The sleeping human brain and the sleeping forest share something beyond metaphor. Both are systems that have learned over the long education of evolution that the hours of darkness are not hours of absence, but hours of essential work. Both are systems that repair during rest what would otherwise accumulate into damage. Both are systems that consolidate during the night what was gathered during the day, preparing for a new cycle of growth and perception and engagement with the world. The forest does not waste its nights. Neither do you. Every hour of this deep stillness is an hour of preparation, of restoration, of the slow and patient labor that makes tomorrow possible. Somewhere in the canopy, an animal you cannot name settles deeper into the hollow of a branch. its small body yielding to the same chemistry, the same gravitational pull of rest that is pulling you down now into the soft layers of sleep. Somewhere in the understory, a fern uncurls 1 more millimeter toward nothing in particular, growing in the dark the way all growing things grow, without witnesses, without urgency, simply because it is the nature of living things to become more fully themselves in the hours when no one is watching. Somewhere in the great interlocking web of roots below the surface, a slow movement of water and nutrients continues through channels so fine they are invisible to the eye, feeding the green world above with the patient constancy of something that has never learned to hurry. And you are here, breathing. Your breath is slow now, so slow that each exhale seems to last a little longer than the one before, as if your body is learning to be more generous with its air, more willing to release, more comfortable with the pause between one breath and the next, that small and perfect stillness where nothing is required of you, where you are simply present at the threshold between breathing out and breathing in, suspended in the dark like a seed in winter soil, like a raindrop at the moment before it falls, like the whole breathing forest in the last silence before dawn. The heartbeat of the rainforest at deepest night is very slow and very steady, and it sounds, if you are quiet enough to hear it, exactly like your own. And so our gentle wandering through the rainforest quietly comes to rest, the canopy still breathing softly above you. If you find yourself still awake, the next chapter waits whenever you're ready, unhurried and peaceful. But for now, let the distant song of rain on wide green leaves carry you somewhere deep and dreamful. Sleep well, dear one. You are safe, you are still, and you are so very loved. Good night.